In the lively town of Mavoko, where laughter filled the air and neighbors lived like one big family, there was a woman named Aisha. She was known for her warm smile, her kindness, and the way she carried herself with grace. Her husband, Tendo, was a tall, charming man who ran a small electronics shop near the market. Together, they were the couple everyone admired, the kind that made people believe in love. They worked side by side, shared their dreams, and built everything they had with their own hands. Every morning, Aisha would pack Tendo's lunch and watch him leave with pride in her eyes. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch sipping tea and talking about their future. The children they hoped to have, the bigger house they dreamed of, the life they wanted to live. People in Mavoko often said, "If you want to see true love, look at Aisha and Tendo." And Aisha believed it too. To her, their bond felt unbreakable, their hearts forever tied together. But sometimes life changes quietly, not with a storm, but with a slow wind that takes everything before you even notice it's gone. It began slowly, the kind of change that you can feel before you can explain. Aisha noticed that Tendo had started coming home later than usual. At first, she told herself it was work, that maybe business was keeping him busy. But soon the excuses became too many, and the warmth in his eyes began to fade. The man who once couldn't wait to tell her about his day now sat in silence at dinner, scrolling through his phone with a blank face. When she reached for his hand, he pulled away gently, pretending not to notice. Nights became longer for Aisha. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of his phone lighting up again and again. He would step outside to take calls, speaking in a low voice that sounded too soft, too sweet, a tone she hadn't heard from him in months. Her heart would sink, but she said nothing. She didn't want to believe what her mind was already whispering. She tried to bring back their old days, cooking his favorite meals, surprising him with little gifts, wearing the perfume he once said he loved. But nothing worked. His laughter disappeared. His hugs felt forced, and his words became shorter. When she asked what was wrong, he simply said, "Nothing, Aisha. I'm just tired," and turned away. The silence between them grew louder with every passing day. Even the house felt different, colder, emptier. Aisha would stand at the kitchen window, watching the sunset and wondering where she had gone wrong. Her friends told her to pray, and she did. Every night, she knelt by her bed and begged God to bring her husband back to her heart. But deep inside, a quiet fear started to grow. A fear that maybe he was already gone, not in body but in love. It was a hot afternoon in Mavoko when Aisha's world quietly broke apart. She had gone to Tendo's shop to bring him lunch like she always did. He wasn't there, but a few of his friends were sitting outside laughing loudly. She didn't mean to listen, but one of them said, "Tendo is lucky, man. Lulu is something else. That new girl from Nairobi, young, beautiful, full of life." Aisha could never compete. The laughter that followed felt like knives cutting through her heart. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled, and the food she was holding almost slipped from her grasp. She stepped back quietly, hiding behind a wall, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Lulu. A new woman. A younger woman. So this was why the late nights, the phone calls, the coldness. The truth stood before her, cruel and clear. The man she had built her life with, the one she had supported through years of struggle, now had eyes for someone else. Memories flooded her mind. How they used to walk to church together, how she helped him start his business, how she sacrificed her own dreams so he could chase his. She remembered how they used to count coins together to pay rent, laughing about how one day they would have more than enough. And now, after all the sacrifices, she was being replaced like she meant nothing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want anyone to see her pain. She walked home slowly, each step heavy, her heart breaking in silence. Inside, she sat on the floor, staring at the lunch she had made with love. She whispered to herself, "So this is what love turns into?" Her soul felt empty, but her pride refused to let her collapse. In that painful moment, Aisha realized that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the person you once called home. After that day, everything became painfully clear. Tendo no longer tried to hide his affair. He and Lulu began walking openly through the streets of Mavoko, laughing loudly, holding hands and taking pictures together as if the whole world needed to see their happiness. Aisha would hear neighbors whispering whenever she passed by, voices too low to catch the words, but sharp enough to wound her heart. Some people pitied her, others gossiped, but no one really understood the depth of her pain. What hurt the most was how Tendo took Lulu to the same places he once took Aisha. The same restaurant where he once held Aisha's hand across the table. He now sat with Lulu, feeding her, smiling, looking at her the way he used to look at his wife. One evening, Aisha saw them by accident when she went to buy groceries. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him laugh, that same laugh that had grown cold in her home. She wanted to scream to ask him why, but her voice refused to leave her. Instead, she turned away, holding her tears until she was alone. At home, she broke down in silence. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes swollen from crying, and whispered, "What did I do to deserve this?" But even in her pain, she refused to lose her dignity. She still greeted people with a smile, still carried herself with grace. When her friends asked why she didn't confront him, she simply said, "You don't fight for what doesn't want to stay." Deep inside, Aisha was breaking. Every laugh, every rumor, every passing glance felt like another crack in her soul. But she held on. She knew that shouting wouldn't change anything, and revenge wouldn't heal her. So she stayed calm, quiet, and graceful, the kind of strength that comes not from pride, but from a heart that refuses to turn bitter no matter how much it hurts. That evening felt different from the start. The sky was heavy, and the wind outside carried a strange stillness. Aisha had cooked Tendo's favorite meal, hoping maybe, just maybe, they could talk like before. She set the table carefully, her heart quietly praying for a miracle. But when Tendo walked in, he didn't even glance at the food. He stood by the door, his face cold and distant, his eyes avoiding hers. She could feel the weight in the air before he even spoke. "Aisha," he said slowly, "we need to talk." Her heart sank. Those 4 words never bring good news. She sat down, her hands trembling. He didn't sit. He looked around the room, the home they built together, and said the words that tore her world apart. "I want a divorce. I found someone better." For a few seconds, the room fell silent. The ticking clock was the only sound. Aisha stared at him, her lips shaking, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. "Someone better," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't answer. He just walked into their bedroom and began packing his clothes into a suitcase. Every fold of fabric sounded like thunder in her chest. Aisha stood frozen, watching the man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with, walk away like it all meant nothing. She wanted to beg him to stay, but pride held her back. Tears rolled down her face as she said softly, "Go if that's what makes you happy." He paused for a second but never turned back. When the door finally closed behind him, the silence was deafening. Aisha dropped to her knees, clutching her chest as if to hold her heart together. The food on the table went cold, and the home that once echoed with laughter was now filled with nothing but emptiness. That night she realized that sometimes, love doesn't end with a fight. It ends with a quiet goodbye that you never saw coming. The days that followed felt endless. Aisha moved through her home like a shadow, quiet, empty, and lost. The bed felt too big, the walls too silent, and every corner reminded her of Tendo. His clothes still hung in the wardrobe, his scent still lingered on the pillow, and each memory felt like a wound that refused to heal. Food lost its taste, sleep refused to come, and her eyes remained swollen from crying. Her friends tried to comfort her, begging her to fight for her marriage, to go after him, to make him come back. But Aisha only shook her head and said softly, "You can't force someone to love you. If they choose to leave, let them." She knew deep down that no amount of pleading would change his heart. So instead of chasing what was gone, she decided to find herself again. One morning, she got out of bed, tied her scarf, and went to the local women's center. She began helping with cooking for the needy, stirring pots of soup, serving food, and washing dishes alongside women who also carried their own silent pain. For the first time in weeks, she felt a little lighter. Each day she went back, she talked less about her past and listened more to others. She met widows, single mothers, and young girls who had been through heartbreak even worse than hers. Their stories gave her strength. Slowly, she began to smile again. Her hands, which once trembled with pain, found purpose in helping others. In the evenings, she would sit outside watching the sunset, whispering small prayers of gratitude. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Aisha began to understand that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, quiet moments when you choose peace over pain, hope over heartbreak. She was still broken, yes, but every day she picked up one more piece of herself, And that was enough to start again. As weeks turned into months, Aisha slowly began to find herself again. The pain hadn't completely left, but it no longer ruled her days. One afternoon, while helping at the Women's Center, she was asked to cook for a community event. She agreed, unsure if anyone would even notice her food. But when the guests began eating, something beautiful happened. People kept coming back for more. They asked who had cooked, and when they found out it was Aisha, they smiled and said, "You have a gift." For the first time in a long while, Aisha felt a spark inside her, a tiny flame of purpose. That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table thinking. Cooking had always been something she loved, something that made her feel alive. Maybe she thought this could be her new beginning. The next morning, she decided to start small. She began taking small catering orders from neighbors, birthdays, family gatherings, small weddings. Her food wasn't fancy, but it was made with love, and people could taste it. Her name started spreading quietly through Mavoko. "Have you tried Aisha's cooking? It tastes like home." Soon the demand grew. She bought bigger pots, printed a small banner, and officially called her business Aisha's Kitchen. Every morning she woke up early, kneaded dough with hope, stirred sauces with strength, and packed meals with prayers. Her food began to reach hotels and offices. People loved not just the taste, but the warmth that came with it, as if every bite carried a piece of her story. Sometimes while stirring a pot of stew, she would smile and whisper, "Maybe this was God's plan all along." The same hands that once wiped away tears were now building something new, something powerful. Aisha's heartbreak had turned into her greatest strength. What she thought was the end of her life was actually the beginning of her purpose. Within a year, Aisha's Kitchen had become more than just a business. It was a movement of hope. What started as one woman cooking from a small stove in her home turned into one of the most trusted catering services in Mavoko. Her food carried not only flavor but heart. People said, "When you eat Aisha's food, you taste kindness." Orders began pouring in from every corner of town, schools, hotels, weddings, and even government offices. Everyone wanted a piece of what Aisha had created. But what made her story even more beautiful was what she chose to do with her success. Instead of keeping it all for herself, Aisha began hiring women who had stories like hers, women who had been left, hurt, or forgotten. Some were widows, others single mothers, some were just trying to rebuild their lives. Aisha gave them jobs, trained them, and reminded them that life doesn't end with heartbreak. She used to tell them, "If you can stand after being broken, you can rise higher than you ever imagined." The kitchen was always filled with laughter and the sound of hope being reborn. The women worked together like sisters, sharing food, stories, and prayers. For Aisha, every face she helped was another piece of healing in her own heart. Her business grew stronger, but more than that, her purpose grew deeper. Soon, local newspapers wrote about her. People admired not only her cooking but her courage. She became a quiet symbol of strength, a woman who turned pain into power without bitterness or revenge. Aisha no longer walked through Mavoko with her head down. She walked with grace, her smile bright, her spirit calm. She had built something that no one could ever take away again. Not a man, not heartbreak, not gossip. Aisha had risen, not loudly but beautifully, like morning light after a long dark night. While Aisha's life was slowly blooming again, Tindo's world was quietly falling apart. At first, his new life with Lulu felt exciting, full of parties, new clothes, and attention. Lulu was beautiful, young, and lively. Everywhere they went, people stared and Tindo felt proud. He believed he had upgraded his life. But soon the shine began to fade. Lulu was not like Aisha. She didn't care about building a home or saving money. She loved luxury, not loyalty. Every weekend she wanted to go out, fancy restaurants, expensive gifts, new dresses. Tindo tried to keep up, spending more than he could afford just to make her happy. But the more he gave, the less she seemed to care. When he came home tired, she complained that he wasn't fun anymore. When he talked about business, she rolled her eyes. Slowly, he began to see the truth. Lulu didn't love him. She loved what he could give her. Then business started to slow down. A few deals failed and money became tight. Tindo started cutting back on expenses, but Lulu noticed immediately. The moment the gifts stopped, her calls became shorter. Her laughter faded. She started going out without telling him where she was going. One evening he called her several times, but she didn't answer. When she finally picked up, she sounded cold and distant. "Tendo, you've changed," she said. "I need more from life." A few days later she stopped coming home. Word spread around town that Lulu had been seen with a new man, a wealthy businessman from Nairobi. Tendo refused to believe it until he saw a picture of them together online. His chest tightened and shame washed over him. He had left a woman who truly loved him for one who never did. The reality hit him hard. He had traded gold for glitter, and now even the glitter was gone. The morning after Lulu officially moved in with Tendo was supposed to be the beginning of their happy life together. At least that's what he thought. He woke up early feeling proud, imagining how different his life would be now. He made breakfast, called her name softly, but there was no answer. The house felt too quiet. When he walked into the bedroom, his heart stopped. The closet was empty. Her clothes were gone, her shoes were missing, and her perfume, the one that used to fill the room, had disappeared. On the table beside her untouched cup of tea lay a small folded note. Tendo's hand shook as he opened it. The words were short but sharp. "You're not the man I thought you were." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a few words that cut deeper than any knife. He read the note again and again, hoping he had misunderstood. But the truth stood before him. Lulu was gone. First he thought maybe she'd come back. He tried calling her, but her phone was switched off. He went to her friend's place, but no one knew where she was. Or maybe they did and just didn't want to tell him. The same friends who once laughed with him about his upgrade now avoided his eyes. Tendo felt humiliated, betrayed, and alone. The house that once echoed with Lulu's laughter now felt like a graveyard of mistakes. The silence was loud, and the emptiness unbearable. He sat on the couch staring at her note, his chest tight with regret. For the first time he realized what he had done. He had destroyed something real for something fake. He remembered Aisha's gentle eyes, her patience, her loyalty. And as tears filled his eyes, he whispered, "What have I done?" That morning Tendo finally felt the kind of pain he had once caused. The pain of being left without warning. The pain of realizing too late that love built on lies never lasts. After Lulu left, Tendo's life began to fall apart piece by piece. At first he tried to act strong, pretending everything was fine, smiling in front of people, and saying Lulu had just traveled. But deep down he knew she wasn't coming back. The once confident, proud man started to look tired, worn out, and older than his years. His friends, the same ones who used to cheer him on, slowly began to disappear. They stopped visiting, stopped calling, and when they saw him in public they simply nodded and walked away. No one wanted to be around him anymore. His business began to suffer too. Without focus he missed meetings, made poor decisions, and lost important clients. Bills started piling up. The shop that once buzzed with customers now sat almost empty. Tendo tried borrowing money, but people no longer trusted him. Even the young men who once looked up to him started whispering behind his back. The same people who once envied his life with Lulu now pitied him. He spent most days alone, sitting in his quiet house that felt colder than ever. Sometimes he would scroll through old pictures of Aisha, her smile, her eyes full of warmth. It hurt to remember how she used to wait for him at the door, how she believed in him when no one else did. Regret began to eat him from the inside. He realized that in chasing temporary beauty, he had lost something far more precious: real love, peace, and a good woman's respect. At night he couldn't sleep. He replayed every cruel word he had said to Aisha, every time he ignored her, every moment he made her feel small. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on his chest. Tendo had built his world on ego, pride, and selfishness, and now everything he had built was gone. He finally understood that when you break a heart that truly loved you, life will one day break yours in return. Months passed, and Tendo's life was a shadow of what it used to be. He had lost almost everything: his joy, his money, and the respect he once commanded. One morning he received an invitation to a corporate luncheon organized by a large company he hoped to work with. It felt like a small chance to rebuild his name, so he dressed carefully, wore his best suit, and walked in with forced confidence. The hall was bright and elegant, filled with business leaders, music, and laughter. But what he saw next stopped him cold. Standing at the front, wearing a beautiful African dress with golden embroidery, was Aisha. She looked breathtaking, calm, confident, and glowing like the sun itself. She was the official caterer and guest of honor, celebrated for her success and the impact of her business, Aisha's Kitchen. Everyone around her was praising her food, her leadership, her kindness. The same woman he had once left behind was now standing tall before everyone, respected and admired. Tendo's heart pounded as he watched her speak gracefully to the crowd. Her voice carried warmth and strength, the kind that comes from surviving pain and turning it into power. She smiled with peace, not pride. She didn't look like a woman who had been broken. She looked like a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes. For the first time in his life, Tendo felt truly small. He wanted to hide, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. Every word she spoke reminded him of what he had lost. People stood up and clapped for her, and Tendo joined quietly, clapping with trembling hands and tears burning in his eyes. When Aisha's gaze finally met his across the room, she didn't frown or look away. She simply gave a small, calm smile, not of revenge but of peace. In that moment, Tendo realized something painful yet beautiful. She had healed, and he was still broken. When the event ended and the crowd began to leave, Tendo stood frozen in his seat, watching Aisha as she packed up her things with her team. His heart was pounding so fast he could hear it in his ears. For months, he had imagined what he would say if he ever saw her again. But now that she was right there, graceful, successful and glowing, the words refused to come out. Still, something inside him pushed him forward. Slowly, he walked up to her, his palms sweaty, his pride gone. "Aisha," he whispered, his voice shaky. I made a mistake." His eyes filled with tears he could no longer hold back. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. I thought I was chasing happiness, but I ended up destroying everything good in my life. Please forgive me." Aisha looked at him quietly for a moment. Her expression was calm, her eyes soft but unreadable. Then she gave a small, gentle smile, the kind that carried both peace and power. "No, Tendo," she said softly. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And so did I." Her voice was steady, but her words cut through the air like a blade of truth. Tendo lowered his head, ashamed. He had expected anger, maybe tears, but not this. There was no hate in her tone, just strength. It was the kind of grace that made him feel even smaller. She reached into a tray, picked up a plate of food and handed it to him. "Eat," she said kindly. "You look like you haven't eaten well in a while." He took the plate with trembling hands, unable to speak. Aisha turned and walked away to join her team, her head high, her spirit untouchable. Tendo watched her go, tears streaming down his face. In that moment he understood something he had never known before. Real power isn't in revenge. It's in forgiveness that needs no words, only dignity. The room went silent for a few seconds after Aisha handed Tendo the plate of food. Everyone nearby had seen what happened, and their eyes followed her as she walked away, calm, elegant, and full of grace. There was no anger in her steps, no pride, no bitterness, just quiet strength, the kind that makes people stop and feel something deep inside. Tendo stood there holding the plate, unable to move. His throat tightened as the reality of that moment sank in. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She was showing him the kind of heart he had thrown away. He sat down slowly, staring at the food, the same kind of meal she used to make for him years ago. For a moment he was taken back to their little home in Mavoko, the laughter they once shared, the love he had once known. But now that love was gone, replaced by silence and regret. He tried to eat, but every bite tasted like shame. Around him, people whispered softly, but no one laughed. They had all witnessed something powerful, not a scene of revenge but of dignity. Aisha didn't look back even once. She continued working with her team, smiling, giving instructions and serving others with kindness. Her peace spoke louder than any insult ever could. Everyone could see it. The woman he once left broken was now the one teaching the whole room what true strength looks like. Tendo lowered his head, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. That single act, her calm forgiveness, broke him more than any harsh words ever could. In that moment he understood that real power doesn't shout or seek revenge. It stays silent, stands tall and forgives, not because it forgets but because it has healed. And Aisha, the woman he once crushed, had now risen far above him, glowing with a grace that humbled even the proudest hearts in that room. Aisha's name soon became a story everyone in Mavoko told with pride. People spoke of her not as the woman who was left, but as the woman who rose. From heartbreak, she built a life filled with peace, love, and purpose. Young girls came to her for advice, women found courage through her journey, and even men admired her quiet strength. Her catering business grew beyond Mavoko. It became a brand known across the region, trusted for its warmth and excellence. But more than the success, it was Aisha's heart that shined the brightest. She never bragged about what she had achieved. Instead, she used her blessings to lift others. She funded small businesses for single mothers, helped girls go back to school, and continued to remind everyone that pain does not have to end in bitterness. It can be turned into power. Every morning, she would walk through her kitchen with a gentle smile, watching the women she had once comforted now working proudly beside her. She had turned her wounds into wisdom, and her tears into testimony. When people saw her now, confident, peaceful, and radiant, they saw more than a survivor. They saw hope. Aisha had proven that sometimes life breaks you only to rebuild you stronger. The woman who was once left behind had not only healed, she had risen higher than anyone ever expected, showing the world that grace, faith, and courage can turn even the deepest pain into a beautiful new beginning.